Hi, in this video we're going to do some things with C# and ASP.NET to create a login screen and a registration screen. So you can see the goals in front of us here. We're going to work with routes and controllers, we're going to add models and views, and this will end up with an application that has a login page, and we're going to design it kind of in a stepwise fashion. So the first version will be very simple, then the second will have some hard-coded user values, and when we reach the end, we will actually have a database that we can query and find out who is actually a user and who is not, and validate their login. So that's what we're going to code here in the next few videos. So let's get started here in Visual Studio. I'm going to create a new project, and as before, we're going to create an ASP.NET project with C# as our language. Now for this project, I'm going to name it as Register and Login App, because really that's what it's going to be demonstrating here. And so we'll choose Create. Now for the options, we're going to select here version 5.0. That's the current version of ASP.NET. I'm going to choose the Model View Controller. And strange as it may seem, I'm going to leave no authentication here. So there are two options for creating authentication. One is that you can use their ORMs, their Object Relational Model, or their mapper, I guess they're called. And that will create your database for you automatically, and that is frequently a good choice for people who are in a hurry. However, we're going to build our tables on our own, and we're going to write our own SQL statements because this just kind of gives you a better background on what's happening inside the app. And so we're going to leave no authentication selected, even though this is an authentication app. Now I'm going to leave the other options as you see here and choose Create. So it looks like the app is done building, so let's close the welcome screen. And let's open up the folders here, and I'm specifically interested in the folder called Controllers. This is where we're going to start. So I'm going to right-click and add a new controller here, and I'm going to call this thing the Login Controller. I'm going to select MVC Empty and choose Add. So I name this thing Login Controller and choose Add. So this looks familiar. We've done this in previous lessons. If you haven't looked at those, go back and see what the playlist shows you of how to get introduced to ASP.NET and Visual Studio. So what we're going to do next is we are going to add the model for our program. So in the past, we have opened up the Views folder and the Controllers folder, and now the Models folder. So the models of what you have in a project are classes. And so let's go ahead and open up a new item here. So I'm right-clicking and choosing New Item and selecting Class. And the object that I'm interested in creating here is a user, because this is about user authentication. So I just type in the user. I don't worry about the extension. It'll automatically add that, and choose the Add button. Okay, so you can see on the screen now, this is the standard code for a class in any kind of a language. You have a descriptor at the top. So for this user class, I'm going to give it 3 properties. And the best way to create a property is just type the prop extension, or shortcut I guess it's called, and then press your tab key twice. It will give you the properties, and you just have to overwrite them. So the first property is the ID number for a user, and that's an integer. Notice the get and set are automatically there, so that's how C# works with getters and setters. We're going to use a username that's a string, and then a password as well, which is also a string. And so 3 properties will define what a user is. Now I'm going to make one small correction here. I'm going to rename user as user model, just to be more specific. So I'm going to right-click on the user object in the Solution Explorer and rename it as user model. So I'm going to switch over now to the Login Controller, and I'm going down into the action called Index. It's the only action we have for this controller. Let's right-click in here and choose Add View, and then we're going to choose Razor View, the second one, and you notice it says here in the notes that a razor view with or without a strongly typed model. So now we're going to, since we have a model, now we're going to use the model in this view. So let's go ahead and choose the Add button, and be careful not to just select the OK button yet. We're going to leave the name as index. So the predefined types of views that you can use and templates here are create, delete, details, edit, and list. So in most forms that you think of in a web form or any kind of an application, these are the CRUD applications. These are the database kind of application things. So there is no login form here, and that's really what I'm going for. What's the closest thing that you can come to when you try to log in? Well, a login is a lot like the create user form because it's going to have a username and password in it. So I'm going to start with the create template and modify from there. Now, since we've chosen a template, it says, okay, what kind of a model are you going to use in this template? And you can see that there's several, including the one that we've created called user model. So I'm selecting user model, and you can see that it is one of the things that the program recognizes as a valid model in your solution. Now let's go ahead and choose this, create as a partial view, so it's going to fit into the layout nicely, and then choose add. Okay, so my form is now created. Let's take a look and see what is on the screen and then what is in the project folder. So you can see on the screen it's mostly HTML code. But let's take a look at the top of the form here. So on line 1, this is an important line. You'll see it on almost every kind of a view from now on in your projects. It says at model. So that yellow highlighting is telling you that this is some CS code, some C# code, and it is going to define what item is associated with all of the input form items on the screen. So you can see registration and login app, that's the name of my project, dot models tells me what folder that I'm looking in, and then finally the user model. So this says that one user will be passed along to this form, and then it will also be submitted from this form. So a user form is associated here. Now what's the form? You can see that it's a form that has a bunch of divs, it looks like, and there is an input. So input for the value of ID. Here's another input for the username, and then the input for the password. So that should sound familiar. Those are the 3 different properties of our user object. Just to remind you what the user object is, I'm going to open up the user model and see these 3 properties. So we have ID, username, and password. So the code that was generated is automatically going to create these data entry items for every property in the form. Now I'm just curious to know what this looks like, so I'm going to run the app and see this thing in the browser. Alright, so we got the app up and running now, and you can see that it's the default application that we've seen before. It has home and privacy. So since there's no link in the nav bar, we have to manually go find the controller that we just created. So the controller, as you might remember, it was called login controller. So if I put the word login here and press enter, then I get this form that was just generated. So it is indeed a form for creating a user. So it has an ID, username, and password. So it's pretty close to a login form. We're going to modify it so that it does become a login form. So we'll change the title. Instead of user model, we'll say please log in. We'll delete this ID section, and we'll change this data entry here from a free text or plain text password to a password type. And instead of the create button, we will have a button that says login. So it'll become a login form. So let's go ahead and change those things. I'm going to close the browser and then start working here on this form here. So first of all, I don't really need to see the ID number. We don't provide the ID number when we log in, so I'll just delete that. And then for username, we can just use it as the same. The type for this password should be added here. So the type is not a text. Let's go with password. Okay, so we'll change that. Now down here for the button, it says the value for the button is create. So let's change that to login. And then the top where it says the H4, it says user model. We'll just say please log in. All right, so that should be enough changes here to make it look like a login page. So let's go ahead and run the app and see what we get. Hey, great, the app is running. So let's go to the login URL. And let's see what we have. So now we have a login form. It says, please log in, give me your username and password. So what happens if I do provide something? I'm going to provide some junk here, and if I look at the password, you can see it is definitely junk, and choose login. So this login should have the action up here of index. So let's see what that does. We're looking at index, and when I click index, it brings me right back to index. So it's kind of a circular loop here. However, we have got to make a few more modifications, and then we're on the right track. So let's first of all change this action. Instead of going back to the same form as it is, let's change this to something called process login. So that's an action that doesn't exist yet. So that would cause an error. But we're going to fix that. If we go back to the login controller, we can add a new action, and we'll call it process login. So let's start off with a basic version of this process login. We'll create the function as a public item, and we'll use iActionResult as the return type because we're going to return another web page. I'm going to call it process login, and then I need to have some kind of a return set up. So we're going to return a view, and I'm going to send the browser to the next page, which I'm going to call login success. Let's assume it was successful. Now there's a few things missing here, but this is the basic idea, is that the form is going to resubmit to the controller, and the action is specified as process login. Now we need to have an item that is sent to us so we can actually process the login. So I'm going to tell it the thing that I'm expecting is a user model. So I type in user model, and then the word user model in lowercase is probably okay. So what is wrong here? We've got the angry underline, and it says, I don't know what user model is. Well, we can probably fix that with some potential fixes. I go down to the bottom, and it says, I suggest that you use the this class here called models, this folder. So if I choose that, I have a new line on line 2 that says, I'm importing the models. So now I can see the user model, and the error goes away. Now, when I get a success message, I'm going to have to pass along this thing, so I'm going to give it some more data. So I'm going to accept a user model and then send that as a parameter to the next view. So the call or the return statement here is showing two properties now. The first property is the page that I'm looking for. The second property is the data that it is going to it. So login success needs to be verified, of course. We haven't fixed all that problem yet. We have to do an if statement to see if we actually got the right username and password. Let's fix that now, and let's put an if statement in here. So I'm going to set up an if statement. Let's say we're going to ask if the username, so userModel.username, equals some string, and also the password has to equal some string. And if that is true, then we will proceed to return this success. Now let's give ourselves a hard-coded username and password. So I'm going to just say that the only person that can log in here to my app is Bill Gates, and I'm going to make up a password called Big Bucks. All right, so that is the only user right now that will actually work on this system. Now, if this is successful, we should put the return statement in here and say, yes, you are now going to be sent to the login success page. However, if that is not true, it means if we have an else statement, then I'm going to paste in a different page. Let's do login failure. And that will give us another chance to tell the user that, nice try, but it didn't work. So I've just created two new page references that don't exist yet. So let's create those next. So I'm going to save this page. And so now we can use the same process that we did before. So I'm going to right click in this area and choose add view. And I'm going to choose this second option. Let's call this thing login success. Now I'm spelling this letter for letter exactly as I put into the statement here. So capital L, capital S. And I might as well tell the user which item that was used to log in. So instead of sending a create form, I'm going to select the details template. So the details template just shows all the properties of what your object is. Well, the object that I'm sending is a user model. So we'll select that. We'll select the rest of these check marks as seen here and choose add. Hopefully this works. Okay, so the code is now generated. Let's look at the form that was just created. So there is no input form anymore. It's just displaying data. The top line says that we are using the user model as our object. This is where the data is coming from, so it's expecting that to be passed to it. And then it says I'm going to produce a bunch of data. It's just going to show each item in the list. So where is the most important part here? I have something called display name for and then display for. That's kind of a strange idea of how this works. But let me simplify it for you, and then we will revert to the code that we have here. So I'm going to comment this one out and say we could write this in a format that would be more understandable. Let's see, it didn't like that comment. How do I do comments here? Is it, no, it is, this is HTML. So I'm going to have to use the two arrow, or the arrow exclamation mark and then two hyphens. So that is the HTML comment. So for the replacement, I'm going to put in @ symbol, put in a capital model, and then a dot. And you can see that the properties of my model are provided for me. And so the first thing I'm going to choose is ID. So that will print the ID number. Now, what's the difference between what I commented out and what I have here? Really, in our case, there is no difference. Either one of these will work. And so if you like this one, line 12, which I kind of prefer because it's so simple, that's the best way to start when you're creating these forms. However, there's a good reason why there's this strange function that's going on here. So when we have a arrow function that says take an input to the function as model, and for the return value do model ID, this processing of a function call actually will make the data format correct. And so if your display name is somehow defined differently than the property name, then this will work better. For our case, right now, there's no difference. So I'm just going to leave these two in here for right now, and you'll see what happens when I run this. So let's go ahead and log in, and we'll find out if this login success works. All right, so the app is up and running. So the first thing I want to do is go to the login page. So I'm going to type in the word login, and remember that is the index action on the login controller. So it says, what's your username? Well, I think it was Bill Gates is what I said, or was it one word? Let's see. I'll find out. And then for password, it was Big Bucks. I remember that. Let's see if that's the right way it's supposed to be spelled. Yes, all lowercase, and let's choose login. And let's see. We have a problem. Obviously, I typed in something wrong, and I have an error. So what's my error? It says the view login failure was not found. Obviously, it tried to show me the failure page, and the failure page doesn't exist. So let's back up. And I'm pretty sure that I spelled Bill Gates with a single, all one word. And then we kind of try it again. Let's see. Big Bucks is his password. I'm going to check to see if I spelled that right. And now I log in. This time, I got a success. So what do we have for our username and password? You can see there that it's spelled out for us. So everything in this code over here on the left is shown over on the web page now on the right. So if I wanted to change the display type, then I could go and modify the rest of these properties to look like the one that I did for the ID. But for right now, let's just say that this is the success message. We better tell the user it was successful. So instead of just showing them what happened, I'm going to put up at the top a message. So inside of the H4, I'm going to say login successful. All right, let's go back into the controller now, and let's add the other items. So we're looking for login failure, and so let's go ahead and right-click, choose Add View, select the Razor view, choose Add. Let's change this to login failure. So that's the file name. Let's also say we're going to show the details of what we sent. So this is the user model, and then finally the add button. All right, so we got the form up. This one here looks a lot like the previous one. If you look at the title though, we have login failure listed as the name, and if you look over into the folders called views, you'll see login has now three things. It has index, login failure, and login success. So we want to tell this is the problem now. So let's say you have failed me for the last time. So I'm going to tell them on another line that says the following information is incorrect. Now I don't care about the username, the user ID, so I'm going to highlight the first two sections here for just showing the ID, and I'm going to delete those. So it'll just show the username and password. So let's try this again. We'll run, and this time when we do a login failure, we should see a message. All right, so the app is up and running. So let's go and type in the login URL again. And we have a username and password. So I'm going to type in some gibberish here. So we're guaranteed not to have a successful login. I choose login. And now we have the failure message that shows up. It says, you have failed me for the last time. The following information is incorrect. And then it shows what the model was as it was sent to us. Now the code is also generated some links to us. So it's expecting us to create more views, such as we can edit this information or back to the list. So back to list, let's take a look and see where that link is leading to us. So back to list is supposed to send us to the index option. So let's see what that is. So our index option is the login form. And if I click on this where it says back to list, it stays here. So this is a success and failure login that seems to work. However, we don't have any real data. We just have Bill Gates as our only user. So let's stop here, but the next video we will create a database of users that we can look up and see if they're actually in our system. And if they are, then we have a successful login. And so database integration is coming up next.